The Diet of the Ancient Regime by Jack Brown. So, what was eaten in Europe during the ancient regime? Most of the diet consisted of any form of bread like wheat, rye, or white bread, and then also any type of meat, like meat from a deer, pig meat, sheep meat, and a lot of this meat was supplied to them, obviously, from the Americas. And then their palate began to get more diverse. In the south, fruit began to become more common, and then eventually that spread to the north. Once again, a lot of this fruit came from the Americas. And then, obviously, we know Europe loves alcohol, and alcohol and other types of drinks like tea began to become more popular all throughout Europe. So, peasants did not get a lot of meat. If they did, it was very low quality meat. What they lived off of was bread and water. Sometimes they would mix the two to make it into some sort of porridge or something, but there was also a specific bread for peasants called black bread. And France and Spain, actually, they were the first to implement cassava bread into their food, and cassava bread can be kept for 2 to 3 years without going bad, so that was a very good discovery for France and Spain, and it helped them a lot. So next is, how was the food prepared? The food was prepared in multiple ways, almost every single way you can think of, whether it be frying, roasting, baking, boiling, broiling. They did it all. And the food was very bland. Obviously, they didn't have too many spices, but to account for this blandness, they will end up adding a lot of seasoning, which I'll talk about later. Okay, caloric intake. Obviously, this varied throughout Europe, but generally, you can divide it between the three estates. So, the first estate consisted of all the clergy, the second estate consisted of all the nobles, the third estate consisted of all the peasants. So the first two estates, the clergy and the nobles, they received high-carb diets from bread and alcohol. They got a sufficient amount of protein with all the meat. And on the other hand, the third estate, with all the peasants, their diet had very little vitamins and low to no protein in their diet. They basically lived off of milk, bread, and water for their whole life. Seasonal nature of food. So, food in Europe, in almost all places at this time, was very bland. And they were looking for ways to make their food taste better. So, often this would mean incorporating different types of veggies into stew and soups, making all types of stew and soups. They also really emphasized salt in a lot of their food. They even would preserve livestock in salt to make it taste better when they cook it and then eat it. Other spices they used were pepper and ginger, but the most expensive of these spices was by far salt. Salt was so expensive at this time. Holidays. So, the first and second estate celebrated holidays by eating meat, which was a privilege. And then peasants would be lucky if they even got a taste of meat on these holidays and celebrations. The Columbian Exchange is basically what brought a lot of the food to Europe, and it was brought there from the Americas. It's named after Christopher Columbus when he accidentally stumbled upon America while trying to find India, and it's actually kind of a sad story because he thought that he discovered India, and he lived his whole life thinking that what he discovered was India. So, the Columbian Exchange was basically, it played into mercantilism. It was the exchange of raw goods and materials between the US and Europe, and it was beneficial for both of them. For example, potatoes were part of the Columbian Exchange, and a lot of potatoes were brought into Europe and then implemented into Europe's diet. Also, all different types of fruits, vegetables, spices. Some resources that Europe already had were discovered in America, which provided them a greater supply. So, the Columbian Exchange was a huge factor in Europe's diet because it provided them with a lot of their food.